Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Dave Rubenstein, Editor-in-Chief of SD Times, and I'd like to welcome you to today's program, Best Practices in Calculating the ROI of Web App Development. Selecting the right technology platform is critical of web and mobile application development. Open source solutions may appear free, but can place a heavy maintenance and support burden on development teams. But commercial solutions can initially appear more expensive because of the upfront and licensing costs. So what's a company to do? We'll find out in a little while, but before we get into the program, I have a couple of quick announcements. Today's program is going to be followed by a live Q&A session, and at any time during the presentation, you don't have to wait till the end, you can ask a question by typing it into the Q&A, the questions box in your control panel, hit send, and after the presentation, we'll get to as many as time allows. Secondly, this presentation is going to be available on demand on the SD Times website, probably within the next day or so you can watch it over and over and over again to your heart's content. Okay, joining us for today's session are Diane Haglund. She's the founder and principal of Dimensional Research, a company she founded, and prior to founding that company, she spent several years as a research analyst for King Research, where she gained experience with global research methods, as well as pioneered online survey and custom collateral offerings. Also with us today is Kristen Brennan. Sorry, Kristen. She's Vice President of Marketing at Sencha, with more than 20 years of experience in enterprise software marketing. She most recently spent 4 years at Coverity, which is now Synopsys, and she's held leadership roles in product marketing, partner marketing, developer marketing, and product management at HP. So now I'm going to turn it over to Diane to take it away. Go ahead, Diane.
Well, thank you so much, and everyone, I appreciate the opportunity to be here and share with you some of the findings from our recent project. Sencha approached Dimensional Research several months back with a really interesting problem. They wanted to find a way to actually put numbers on the types of value that were achieved by using their solutions. And they wanted the kind of thing that, one could show us CFO or other business manager that would clearly demonstrate the monetary value of their solution. So we put together a project and we did 10 in-depth phone interviews with Sencha customers, all of whom had responsibility for choosing tools and all of whom mandates were to choose tools with a focus on the value received from those tools. They were all responsible for web, mobile, or kiosk applications, many of them, all of those things, and lived in the United States and Europe. So this was an international project. So I'm going to spend the next few moments sharing with you what we heard from those customers. But before I do that, I feel that it's necessary that we have a conversation about open source, because so often the option can feel, particularly when you're talking to a business stakeholder who doesn't really understand issues around total cost of ownership, that open source feels free and commercial software feels, not free and expensive. And so what's the attitude towards open source? And I want to start off, and so we're going to talk about, comparing against open source. But I do want to mention before we get started, this isn't going to be an anti-open source talk. In fact, all of the Sencha customers we spoke to were very positive about open source, and their mandate was to always go out and look for the best value for their company, whether that was open source or whether that was commercial solutions. They all had open source adopted somewhere in their environment. In fact, interestingly, what we heard from many of the Sencha customers was that they really had embraced open source, but often on the back end, MySQL, PHP, environments like that, with the reason being that they had much more control over everything in their data center, so they felt open source was a better fit there. But on the client devices, they had much less control, and so the value of something like Sencha was so much more. So with that, let's go and talk about how do we build a business case for Sencha? What are the numbers that we can look at? And we're going to look at 3 areas. The first, which we're going to spend the most time on, is just having an integrated and supported platform. What does that mean in terms of numbers and dollars saved? We're also going to talk about cross-browser development and cross-device development. We're going to end our presentation with a few comments on the soft values of using a framework like Sencha that don't really have numbers associated with them, but can be very important also. So let's start off, and we're going to spend most of our time here starting about that first item, which is what's the value, what's the ROI of working with a single, integrated, and tested framework. One of the things that the Sencha customers emphasized was that had they not used Sencha, they very would have likely had to have some kind of dedicated team within their organization who did this. And it was hard, right? So these were expensive resources, hard to find resources to do something like this. This is a complicated problem, and they emphasize that because Sencha as a company is focused only on this, not only were they not having to build that capability in-house, but there was no way an in-house capability could match the expertise of what Sencha had developed, over the years, and really that was all they did. So that became very, very important. That said, just saying that would not be enough for a CFO. So we had to talk to them about how do we put dollar values on top of that? What would that, what was the difference in development man hours? What would that framework team have cost? And the answers varied to some degree depending on applications, but the picture that all of these customers painted was of many, 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 many small costs that added up over time. I had a fascinating conversation with a development executive who worked at a large financial services company, and they were really focused on cost, and they wanted to have hard numbers. They didn't, they had a management team that didn't believe I got the sense that I like this. They needed numbers, and so they went ahead and actually did a test case where they chose a control for their application and did the end-to-end development and testing for that control using both Sencha and an open source control. They chose a grid with some specific features. And then they logged every single part of the effort so that they could measure the difference. And what they looked at when the open source was, first of all, they had to spend some time looking for options and check them out and researching. So that was a little time, not overwhelming, but it was time. Then they, plugged it in and found out that it didn't work. And it turned out that there was a naming conflict with some of their own code. So they fixed that. That was another, 20 hours to figure that out. So again, not overwhelming, but time consuming. And then they, all of these things. And, for just this one control, they did the same thing with Sencha. And with Sencha, it was like, well, the grid was there. They found it, and it worked. They didn't have to do any additional effort. So they found that the difference between just with this single grid was 100 hours in the creation and maintenance, comparing Sencha with open source. And then multiplying that over all the components and all the years that an application is used, they were able to quantify a real tremendous difference over the course of an entire application. Now, when we had the same conversation, and all the customers had similar stories, although none had been quite so, this individual had certainly quantified much more carefully than many others. And there was a sense that definitely Sencha conservatively was saving, a team with Sencha was between 50% more productive and twice as productive for a given application. Again, this depends very much on the application that was being developed. Certainly, one example that was given, one of our Sencha customers had a marketing team that would crank out these little campaign apps that was essentially some text in a form that captured registration information that had a lifetime of about 3 months. And there was not any particular savings with Sencha there, but it took no time at all where, when you look at all your components, particularly if you think of your interface elements, your view systems, your logic, your data handling, your server I/O, that this becomes tremendously valuable to use Sencha's approach. So we'll get to those numbers in a moment, but before we do that, I do want to mention that to date, we've sort of been talking about initial development, and the second place where having an integrated and supported platform matters a lot is when your application moves into maintenance mode. I'm sure everyone on this call, knows the saying that a patch in one place is a bug somewhere else, and certainly, interface controls are no different. And so over the course of maintenance, because Sencha was providing a platform and a framework that was already tested, the savings here were, definitely twice as much, sometimes, as much as 3/4 of the cost of using open source, 3/4 less. So tremendous savings there once you got into maintenance. The other thing that was mentioned once an application was in maintenance, and I know Kristen will talk about this more and explaining in detail how Sencha does this, but because they use a common use model and a common coding style across all of their components, it means that, over the course of an application, as developers come and go, it's much easier to pick up and make adjustments because they're not having a completely new approach every time. So what does that mean in terms of numbers? How do we take these experiences that all these customers had and actually calculate, make that calculation you can show a CFO? So the basic formula is to look at your initial development and Sencha savings on initial development, and then add the savings for annual maintenance over the lifespan of the application. So a typical application, perhaps it would have had 800,000 developer costs without Sencha, has enough controls that we're seeing there's a 50% reduction in the initial development. So now we're seeing that we're saving about half of that. So our savings on the initial development are 400,000. Then we look at maintenance costs, where Sencha dramatically reduced the maintenance costs for an application with 5 years of application use. We see significant savings of well over half the cost of maintenance without Sencha. So this all adds up. And I will emphasize that this is a ROI calculation for each application. So this would, if you're doing multiple applications, you would do a similar calculation for each one. So next, I want to move to the second area of ROI, very measurable ROI, that the Sencha customers shared with us, which is the cross-browser support. Ever since we've had both Netscape and Internet Explorer, the problems with getting your application to run the same in any browser has just been a thorn in the flesh for developers. And one of the interesting comments that came out over and over again is that in a Sencha environment, cross-browser issues just really, almost don't exist. They're not completely gone. There's occasional minor issues, but in a non-Sencha environment, that tended to be pretty common. We typically heard like about 10% of bugs were cross-browser bugs, and that just went away when working in a Sencha environment. The other thing that was emphasized when we talked about savings in terms of cross-browser development wasn't just that there was this these man hours that didn't need to be put into fixing bugs, but also that these particular hours are, they're boring. No developer gets to work and it's like, woohoo, today is my cross-browser bug fixing day. This tends to be a very tedious form of development and a bit discouraging for the team. So it's quite a benefit, not just in terms of the man hours saved, but the saving of really tedious man hours. So the ROI calculation here is very much related to the way that all of the cross-browser issues add up over time and over a number of browsers without something like Sencha. So if you look at this calculation, there's not a huge difference necessarily up front on cross-browser development with Sencha or without Sencha. One of the examples that we were given in this project is that, if you needed an extra browser, each extra browser, and we're saying extra here because obviously for your first browser, you do all the development, for example, on Chrome, but then you're looking at, Internet Explorer and Firefox and Safari as your extra browsers where the savings are. And so, across, say, 2 additional browsers, development costs might be, 30,000 without Sencha, 5,000 with Sencha. So savings are, say 50,000. Again, a very good amount of money, very reasonable, but small. But then where we really see the savings is over time. We heard typically an application that has 2 updates per year, and the application is intended to be used over a 5-year period, and we're starting to see that this adds up to some very, very significant savings in not needing to do cross-browser development over the lifetime of an application. The last area, which may not be relevant to everyone, so I don't want to spend a lot of time on it, but is the savings around cross-device development. So for those people who have to deliver across, desktop, web, and mobile, the universal app that Sencha offers it can save some time. Again, one of the conversations we had with the customers is that certainly there's an underlying question here whether the business requirements of the application allow a hybrid application approach, or whether there is a need for a native application. But once it is established that a hybrid app is going to fit the business needs of the application, Sencha becomes an excellent and cost-effective solution. In this case, the calculation is very straightforward. As a general rule of thumb, let's take an example of someone who does their initial development in iOS and then wants to develop the same thing for Android. Typically, you find that the costs for that second platform, in this case Android, are about 80% of the initial platform. You can reuse some things on the back end and obviously, the workflow and things like that, but it really is a completely second development effort that can be avoided using Sencha's support for cross-device development. So you simply take, your lifetime costs for the first platform, use that to calculate the cost of the second platform, probably 80%, and there is your savings with Sencha. It was interesting, actually, one of the customers on this study was saying that the only real problem that they faced using Sencha for some cross-device development is that the first project they did went so well, they were able to ship so fast and really solve a problem for their unit that all of a sudden they got a flood of requests for similar applications like that. And so they had to deal with just a tremendous increased demand, which, is a wonderful business problem for a development team to have. So these are the 3 areas where the Sencha customers were able to put very specific numbers on the value of the product. I will emphasize that we have made this available in a white paper that is available, so I would encourage you to read that and get a sense of what these numbers and these calculations would be for your own environment. But before I pass it over to Kristen, I want to talk about the softer benefits of Sencha. These are the things that the customers couldn't put a number on and felt there was no reasonable way to calculate, but were tremendously important to the value that they received. So we'll quickly run through these. The first is naturally having professional support and services. When there's a problem, knowing that there's someone you can call whose job it is to respond to you, being able to invest in professional services to make sure you start from the beginning with great best practices is tremendously valuable, but again, difficult to put a dollar value on until you actually have that problem. The second thing, is there any development group in the world that's not worried about time to market? Just getting out faster and faster and faster is a constant pressure. And Sencha was something that enabled these groups to very quickly prototype, get feedback, and release faster. Again, difficult to actually quantify the value of that. Next, what was mentioned is end user experience. There were 2 pieces of that. One was the look and feel, and Sencha customers spoke about how the Sencha controls were really beautiful, very attractive, which is expected now, right? Everyone has very high expectations for their applications. The other thing was that there was a consistency to the way the controls worked. And really, having their end users be able to do similar things throughout their applications had a tremendous savings on, for example, training time. One thing, we spoke about this a little bit with the cross-browser development, but all of the managers that we spoke to in this project emphasized that working with Sencha really did decrease the frustration of their development team. I mean, every developer has that experience of that bug that they just takes a lot of time to figure out, understand what's going on, and that's a specific problem that often happens with open source, and there's no one around to, you have to track down someone to help you. And so just kind of calming down some of those edges and those frustrating moments through using a supported and tested framework had value. And finally, if your application has any kind of lifespan at all, it was important and valuable to the Sencha customers to be working with a vendor that was going to be around for the lifetime of their application. And Sencha has had a very strong history of investing in their solutions, supporting their customers, and that gave the Sencha customers I talked to a feeling of confidence that, again, almost impossible to put a dollar value on, but very important to them. So at this point, I'm going to pass it over to Kristen to talk a bit more about how Sencha customers specifically achieve this value. But again, I would encourage you, if this is of interest to you and you see how to calculate the possible ROI and value of your environment, there is a white paper that we've put together that investigates this more in detail and may be helpful to you. So Kristen, let me go ahead and pass this to you.
Great, thanks so much, Diane. So we're really excited to talk to all of you today. This ROI project that we did was really interesting to just get that sense of how do people actually quantify the value. We hear a lot from our customers about why they've chosen us, but to actually see it in numbers was really interesting. And so we do have a calculator that Diane and the dimensional research team put together that we'd be happy to walk people through. So just really starting at why are we able to achieve such a high ROI for our customers is really the comprehensive approach that we take. We provide everything a developer needs to rapidly build data-intensive, cross-platform web applications for the enterprise. And we think that's really kind of a key differentiator for us, is that it's inclusive, hundreds of UI components, tools, and I'll get into more of that a bit later. Data intensive, we have some unique capabilities that can enable people to analyze and visualize complex data sets. So we've got that, and then really the focus on building these complex applications for an enterprise type environment. So we'll get into that a little bit more. And one of the other things that we hear from our customers is that they're really focused on delivering solutions to their customers. Right? This Green Tree International, they have an ERP type solution, and they're looking to build solution, competitive differentiation. At the end of the day, the least amount of time they can spend on building the widgets or the UI components themselves, but delivering that value on top of our framework, that's much better for them. And the reason why people don't want to start by kind of building everything from scratch or starting from a micro framework level is, the world is really fragmented and complex when it comes to technology. If a customer or a company was trying to just build a single application for one device type, it's really pretty straightforward to do that. But that's nobody's reality anymore. I mean, it's just there's too many different device types in the environment. So if you just think about it from even starting at the desktop level, there's a wide range of hardware out there. You've got Macs, you've got Windows machines, etc. You've got different operating systems, and then you have different browsers that you have to contend with: Safari, Internet Explorer, Chrome, and in Internet Explorer, IE9, IE8, they're not dead in the enterprise. People still have to deal with that. So different versions of these different operating systems. And then, more and more, you're seeing that people need to support tablets as well. For a lot of types of enterprises, tablets are just a standard part of how you do business. So that's especially true in transportation and logistics companies, retail companies, maintenance and repair, even healthcare are seeing a wide variety of people making the tablet just part of the standard customer experience. And then, of course, there's mobile devices. So increasingly, people want to access these applications from different device types, and they want the same, not exactly the same, but a consistent experience across the different device types, really the right experience on the right screen at the right time. And that's hard to do if you're starting from scratch. So a lot of people, a lot of companies are turning to web technology for help to deal with the complexity and fragmentation problem. About a year ago, we did a study with Forrester Research to sort of understand sort of where people were in the evolution of adopting web technology, and 69% of the enterprises that were surveyed said that they were turning to web tech to improve their development efficiency. That it's very common that customers are demanding increasingly sophisticated web applications. 51% of people believe that their web and mobile application experience is going to get significantly more sophisticated in the coming year, and that demands on development teams were increasing, but resources weren't. These 53% didn't plan to increase the size of their team, and people weren't planning to increase the timeline. So you have to do more with the same amount of resources and in less time. It's really putting a lot of pressure on organizations, and that's why companies are turning to web tech to help them. They often don't have the resources to build an application multiple times, 3 times for different flavors of mobile phones, or multiple times for the desktop. So people are looking to web tech so that you can write the application once and run it on multiple device types from a single code base. But when it comes to web tech, not all choices are created equally for the same goals and objectives. So as Diane said, there's definitely a time where people are writing a small little application that's going to live for about 3 months for a campaign that marketing wants to run. Maybe starting from a custom framework, an open source solution could be the right choice in that particular case. But when people are thinking about what's the right choice, you need to approach it from, well, what are the time to market requirements for building the application? How much time do I have to focus on kind of the differentiating capabilities of my application versus building it from the ground up myself? And then there's the ongoing maintenance and support burden. So let's say I've built an application, starting with a micro framework, and I've sourced different components and grid, charts from multiple vendors. Well, now what happens if one piece of that solution changes? What if there's a new version of the charts package that I've picked from the open source? Now I have to retest my entire stack, and that takes time, and it can be a frustration on the part of the developers, and maybe even the initial developer that built the app isn't there, so they have to try to recreate the wheel. That can really put a big burden on a development team that's trying to maintain these applications for the long haul. So we see, and when we talk to our customers, a lot of times the reasons why they've turned to Sencha is, it boils into 4 primary reasons. And a lot of these is what Diane was able to capture in the ROI paper and in the calculator that we can make available to all of you. So the first part is just the comprehensive nature of the platform. There are hundreds of integrated, tested, documented UI components and robust enterprise tools. So the development team doesn't need to source UI elements from a lot of different providers. We've got everything they need integrated and documented. Data intensive. So increasingly we're seeing that lots of applications are needing to present and enable their users of the application to manipulate complex data sets. So there's IoT that's creating more data, lots of different demands for more data. So we have really robust charts, grid, pivot grids. It's like an Excel type functionality that lets you sort and analyze results. And with our next release, we're also adding D3 integration so people can now visualize the complex data in very interesting ways. And that's all to make the users of those applications able to make more informed decisions. So a lot of evolution, and that's really a key area of focus for us, is the data-intensive web applications. And then a single coding paradigm. So as Diane said, people like that we have a common model, single paradigm for building these web applications. It's JavaScript first. So people don't need to worry about working with CSS, the HTML5 itself. You can write the application using JavaScript, and our platform takes care of just a lot of those inherent complexities that arise from building enterprise web applications. And then, of course, the professional support. So a lot of customers want to know that there's a commercial entity kind of standing behind the platform that's being provided Should they run into trouble? Should they need help? Should they need to accelerate their schedule and bring on additional resources to build the app? The single vendor that provides training, the support, the technical services needed to help with the ongoing maintenance of the application, as well as accelerating application development and delivery. And it all starts, if you think about it, from our platform. So we have a unique platform that lets people manage the life cycle of their web applications really end to end. And it starts with designing the application. And I'll get into a little bit more detail about each of these. But think about designing the application. You first have to mock up and prototype your app. So what is it going to look like? What's the color schemes, et cetera? Then we have the frameworks to develop the application, the frameworks and tools that our customers need. And then you have to test it, whether it's unit testing or end-to-end testing. And all of that has to integrate with the developer's environment. So in the workflow that they're accustomed to working in. So we integrate into their workflow, and then we support those things or surround those things with education and support and the services that I mentioned. So just taking a deeper dive onto each element of the platform, if you start at the design level, we have a couple of different things that we offer to customers. And the first are XJS stencils. So XJS stencils are unique. These are really targeted for a designer, not a developer that's used to working in code day in and day out. But what stencils lets designers do is work with their preferred tools like Adobe Illustrator, Sketch, OmniGraffle, and create mock-ups or wireframes of what the application could look like. And the nice thing with it is that it enables them to create a visual design that they know can be implemented. So it works with symbols. So symbols represent different elements in the code, but the developer or the designer doesn't have to deal in code, because we know a lot of times they don't work that way. And they're also not going to create a mock-up or a design that actually can't be implemented very effectively by the development team. So stencils really are designed to improve the collaboration between those designers and developers. So you can start with that. And then we have Sencha Architect. It's a visual application builder. So we know a lot of customers and companies are looking to have lower code, drag and drop visual application building. So we have a nice set of capabilities that let people create their applications faster, utilizing some of the capabilities in Sencha Architect. And then really at the heart of our platform is Sencha XJS. So this is what lets people create cross-platform universal web applications. So it supports both legacy and modern browsers. As I said, there's still a lot of enterprises out there that need to support IE8, IE9, et cetera. So it supports both high-performance customizable widgets. So the UI components that can be modified to meet a corporate look and feel, color schemes, et cetera. And it's back-end agnostic. So it can integrate and support data coming from a wide variety of back-end systems. So a very agnostic approach to that. So whether you're working with Oracle mobile cloud solutions or some other type of solution, we can integrate with that back-end. It's responsive layout. So it's really important a lot of times that your application, it may not look, you don't want it to look exactly the same on a desktop as you do on a mobile phone. So we have a responsive layout manager that lets you have really that right customer experience on the screen that you're working with at the right time. Also, ARIA compliance is really important to a lot of organizations, so we support that. And then the infinite grid that we have, really kind of a cornerstone component of XJS. It provides the capability to address and to handle large volumes of data in a grid type environment, and then the charting that can be added to that so that you can visualize those different data sets. And we know that development productivity is critical, so people are trying to get those applications out to market as fast as possible. So we've created a number of tools that people can use to work with the frameworks. So starting with IDE plugins. So we have plugins that are available for the three most popular IDE platforms from Visual Studio, Eclipse, and JetBrains, and they offer things like code inspection, code completion, refactoring, template creation, code generation, navigation, spell check. So really enabling people to start building their XJS applications within their preferred development environment. And then we have a Sencha Command. So think of Sencha Command as a build optimization tool. It automates a lot of the key functions of building an application. So some of the scaffolding, code minification, really full lifecycle management features for the application so that you end up with an app that's really, it's the right size for what you're trying to do. And so it handles just making sure that it manages some of those lifecycle kinds of capabilities from, the production, build generation, and code optimization. And finally, another tool we have is Sencha Inspector. So Sencha Inspector is really designed to make it easy to debug the applications across different browser types. So you can debug your applications running on a mobile device and some theming capabilities as well, so that you can theme or modify the SAS in near real time. For people that want to build their applications in Java, we also offer Sencha GXT. So that's an alternative. If you want to use JavaScript, you can build using XJS. If you want to build your application utilizing Java, we have GXT. So this lets you code in Java using GWT, the Google Web Toolkit, and then the code is compiled and optimized to HTML and JavaScript. So again, it's got a robust set of UI components, rich data APIs, rich documentation, the same grids, plugin-free charting, cross-browser compatibility, and then also the support for touch gestures. And then Sencha Test. So Sencha Test is a new offering from us that we came out with this year. And the reason we came out with Sencha Test is one of the #1 questions that we received from our customers was how do we help them test their applications? And in fact, they're asking us how we test XJS. So because there's so much pressure on developers today to increase productivity, we see a shift of testing. It's moving earlier and earlier into the life cycle, because we know that if people can find and fix defects in their code earlier, it's going to cost less, and it's going to enable them to get the code out to their product out to market faster. They don't have to wait for it to go through a cycle, go over to QA, get pushback from QA because there are a lot of bugs in the code. Some of that may still happen, but it lets the developers find the defects faster using unit testing, and then it enables the QA team to do the end-to-end functional testing that they need to do to make sure that things are working properly. So one of the things that's really interesting about it is that it comes with XJS. It's designed specifically to test XJS applications. So it's got the deepest integration into XJS, pre-authored tests to make sure that you have really accurate test results, and a very seamless process so that it can integrate with different CI systems such as TeamCity. It can integrate with browser farms such as Sauce Labs, and it can also work from the command line interface. So trying to make it even easier for people to test those applications, make sure that they're delivering high-quality apps that have a great user experience. So powerful, flexible, you can automate your tests, and it's supported by a services team training how to use it, how to go about testing, and a robust roadmap behind it so that people can continue to develop really high-quality XJS applications and get them out to market faster than ever. So really, when you think about the Sencha platform, the 3 key benefits that people have, and real cost savings associated with these things, as Diane mentioned. So the multi-device development, from a single code base, you can create applications that can run on the desktop, tablets, and the mobile devices. And so that's part of how you need to think about, well, what's the ROI of your development efforts? How many different platforms do you need to support? And then how many different versions of your application are you going to have per year? And what's the lifetime of your application? So those are critical questions that you need to answer when you can think about how you calculate the ROI of your development efforts for a multi-device kind of requirement. The other is development efficiency. So how fast can your developers build these applications? There's a high cost to development. Oftentimes, they're some of the most expensive resources in an organization. And we saw from the Forrester study that people aren't being able to grow their teams. Complexity is increasing. Demands for time to market are not decreasing. So how do you measure the development efficiency? How quickly can you enable them to get these applications built that offer competitive differentiation and spend the most time developing those kinds of features versus building an application starting by building a framework first from a micro framework. And then quality. So even though customers are demanding more sophistication, more device support, et cetera, they're not willing to sort of take a pass on quality. They're still demanding a really good user experience and a high quality experience across all these different device types. So they want that right experience on the right screen at the right time. And that's where Sencha Test can come in and help as well. Then also we hear from customers that, oftentimes having a team of people that can come in and offer services to help accelerate projects, to help guide or mentor their teams, that's a really valuable resource as well. We have a services team and a set of partners that can help in that regard, from enterprise mentoring, so how do I go about setting up my project, from development, whether it's custom component development, maybe it's UI creation, application design, to building the application kind of end to end. We can help with all of that. We also see that a lot of times people want us just to come in and do an architecture review. Are they building the application in a way that's going to scale for them over the life of the application? They know it's going to live for 3 to 5 years, something like that. So to make sure that they're building it right from the start. We also do code reviews. That's another common type of engagement that we have with the services team, is to take a look at the code the developers are building and make sure that it's optimized for high performance kinds of high performance, responsiveness, etc. And then another one that we're increasingly seeing is migration projects. So there are a lot of companies out there that have their applications that were relying on legacy platforms, Oracle Forms, maybe old IBM I-series types of applications, and how can they kind of bring those into the modern world? How do they preserve the investments that they've made in that old technology, but now bring it into a web application, a cross-platform web application, so not only can they enhance the user experience, but they protect their investments that they've made in sort of the application logic and underlying architecture. So all of those things can be provided by the services team. And then finally, support. So support is probably one of the #1 things that people really like us for, is that support, knowing that there's a company kind of behind the framework there to help them, whether it's remote troubleshooting, whether it's access to major releases, upgrades, bug fixes, nightly development builds, forums where they're going to get their questions answered, because that's really, in the paper that Diane mentioned and that she helped us with, that was one of the key things that people pointed out, is having that support team. They're in crunch time, they have to get their application out, they see a bug. It was pretty remarkable how quickly people were able to get their questions asked, their bugs addressed, to get that application out and meet their delivery deadline and timeline, and start generating revenue or meeting the needs of their internal customers. And we see both. And then, in the Forrester survey, we analyzed and asked people, what are the most important factors of picking a development, a platform for your web application development needs? And a couple of them were here on this list. So really the richness of features was one of the top issues that people cited. And so we have a really rich feature set for our framework. So allowing people to design visually compelling applications, the high performance UI components, back-end agnostic data package, really that powerful analytics grids, charts, trees, that ability to visualize and analyze the complex data that so many customers need to include in their applications now. And then rich documentation and examples. You're not scouring 10 different websites trying to get the documentation for the various components that you've kind of glued together yourself. We've got that rich documentation in one place, and we've tested to make sure that everything works together. So the efficiency, we've talked about that, but there's really no need to source, assemble, maintain third-party components. We've got it all there for you in one place. You can develop it once in that single code base for multiple platforms, and the tools to help you improve your overall efficiency. And then, of course, the services and support, kind of no hidden fees, dedicated support experts, a support team there to support you. And it's a pretty impressive list of market leaders that have picked Sencha. So, we are a horizontal solution, and we've got a lot of really large companies and small companies that are using us in a wide variety of industries, from financial services, ISVs, automotive, healthcare, government, transportation, logistics, I mean, you name it. People are looking to us because really all of these companies are in the business of developing and delivering compelling web applications to their users. And so they want that robust framework that they can count on for these applications that are going to live for more than 2-3 months. So that's really important to these customers, and important to us to be able to serve them. And so for those of you that aren't familiar with Sencha, just a little bit of background information on us. So not only do market leaders use us, but we've been around for a long time. So we've been around since 2007, some really strong venture capitalist backing behind us, 400 man-years of engineering and development expertise in building modern web applications. You're driving web app development using HTML5, JavaScript, CSS, and market-leading components, whether you want to build your application in JavaScript or Java using GXT. And we're proud to say we have 60% of the Fortune 100 as customers and a really large community, large number of enterprise customers and kind of smaller customers as well, using us to fuel and power their web application needs. So if you haven't tried Sencha before, I urge you to check it out. We have a free trial that's available for 30 days. You can see the URL here. And with that, I'd like to open things up for questions.
Okay. Thank you, Kristen. That was great. All right. I want to remind everybody, if they have a question, they can send it in right now. And if they send it in, we'll get to as many as the time is going to allow. Okay, one thing right off the bat, one of our attendees was, I guess, blown away, no other way to put it, by the presentation, saying, this all just sounds too good to be true. So I wonder if you might want to perhaps discuss a little bit why, in fact, it is good and it is true.
Well, I mean, I think I'll start with that, and I'll invite Diane, and we have John Jarboe on the line too. He's a senior technical marketing manager at here at Sencha, that's helping answer some questions. So, but I think is it too good to be true? I would say that the study was based on 10 real-life examples. These are real customers that Diane spoke with for 30, 45 minutes sometimes, giving us their data. And that they've had, for a lot of customers, have to prove it themselves to their organization. We've had some longtime customers that they don't just take it for granted that we're the right choice for them every single time. They actually have to go through technology reviews every 2 years, and they review the Sencha platform versus other alternatives out there in the market. And time again, they found that Sencha is the right choice to meet their needs for enterprise, robust, data-intensive web applications. So, and then, for people that want to take a look at the numbers for their own environment and their own particular needs, Diane and the dimensional research team mentioned a calculator that can be used, so you can put in the needs and requirements for your own web application development needs. And we'd be happy to help you with that. So we have a calculator available that we could walk you through to help see, is the ROI are you going to see the same kinds of savings and benefits that some of the customers in our study were able to realize and achieve? Diane, anything you'd like to add on that?
Yeah, and I think I would agree, echo what you said. And, obviously, dimensional research, I came in, Sencha did introduce us to these customers, so we came in as a research firm with no preconceived notion about what the value should be and what was going on. So the paper and what I shared with you today does represent exactly what these customers shared with me. I think that the thing that really struck me as we were putting together the ROI was very much the savings that came over time. And I would encourage that if you're thinking about Sencha for your particular environment, one of the key things that you'll notice popped up in these calculations is to think about the lifetime of the application and how this really adds up over long periods of time. And so you do end up with this real exponential impact as it's not a one-time savings. It just over time, it grows rather dramatically, which is where I think you do see some of the bigger numbers coming from.
Very good, very interesting. One of the things that has come up, in discussions and from the questions we're getting is people were wondering if they could get a little more depth onto the methodology that was used to complete the survey. And get a little insight into how the numbers came out the way they did.
Sure, absolutely. And so first of all, let me clarify, this was not a survey. This was an in-depth interview. I was on the phone with each of these customers to really drill down and understand exactly what was going on. Every customer had a little bit different, right? ROI is one of these funny things where it can be challenging because everyone demands to see ROI, but then they don't necessarily track it in their environment. So we really looked at how can we capture, like the example that I shared in the presentation, and it's documented very clearly on the paper, the people who did the very detailed line-by-line, hour-by-hour comparison, and then talk about how you can take that and extend that in a reasonable way across an entire project. So, but this was not an online survey. This wasn't a, where people checked, oh, we saved, 10 to 20 hours, 20 to 30 hours. No, not at all. This was a conversation that allowed us to really dig into the value of each individual organization and talk about, some of the, different, organizational impacts and things like that happened as well.
Excellent. Okay, next couple of questions, I guess, are about the framework itself. And somebody was wondering, if a bug is reported on their application, how can they tell if it's in the application code or if it's a problem with the framework? Kristen, maybe you can get into that a little bit.
I'll ask John to take a first stab at that one, and then we'll see if we need to have any further elaboration. But John, why don't you take the first stab?
Okay, sure. I mean, in general, well, first of all, it's hard to generalize about bugs like this just because each individual case is going to be different. But one of the advantages to having a professional support organization behind the product, such as Sencha provides, is that we do have people who are dedicated and have time to look into issues to help diagnose where the problem is and how it can be fixed. And so even though we can't guarantee well, before we know the details of the issue, that we're going to be able to say whether it's ours or in the application, the way that the framework is being used. We can guarantee that we will assign resources, people or time or whatever it is necessary to really look into it and understand the problem and help advise the user as to how they can go about fixing it. Even if it's not something that we can fix in the framework itself, we can still provide workarounds or suggestions to help diagnose what the problem is, where it exists, and how it can either be fixed or addressed in some way that enables the user to be successful, even if the problem continues to exist kind of in the hidden details internally, if that makes sense.
Okay, thank you very much.
And just one thing I want to add to that is that, also, as John said, so that we have a team that can look into it and decide whether it's in the framework or whether it's the interaction. But if it's established by our support team that the issue is in the framework, then it automatically gets escalated to our development team so they can get resolution. And then, as I said, people get access to the nightly build, so as it's fixed and it becomes available in the nightly builds, and that customer doesn't necessarily have to wait for a next release. They could potentially get access to that fix in the nightly build.
Excellent. All right, keeping it moving now to another question. Someone wants to know, is the code that's generated, is it vanilla code for the user experience of the interface, or is it something that can be branded and made, quote-unquote, sexier?
Yeah, so I'll start, and then I'll hand off to John to give a little bit more detail, but it's definitely something that can be customized. So the look and feel of the application, the UI components, we do have certain application templates that have a look and feel, but people can absolutely change the look and feel of the application. They can either do it on their own, they can engage with the services team to change the look and feel of the application, modifying some of the SAS, et cetera, to match maybe a corporate brand identity or that type of thing. And then, John, if you want to add any further details, please go ahead.
Sure. Yeah. So that's true. I mean, there are capabilities that create code, and that's usually for some simplification to help developers kind of get going quickly. And then the framework provides a number of different hooks, whether it's through the framework itself or through supporting technologies such as CSS or the JavaScript that's created, where you can actually go and customize things to make it work, in whatever way it is that you want it to well, maybe not, work isn't the right word. What I meant to say was you can create the user experience that you want your users to have, rather than being constrained by what the framework itself gives you. When we do generate code, it's more of a suggestion or a template, which you can then drop down into and start customizing. And one of the benefits of the XJS framework in particular is that it standardizes a lot of those customizations and helps you understand what needs to change in order to achieve what you want, as opposed to your developers having to go and kind of poke around in the debugger interface for the browser, for example, to understand which elements are being styled by which CSS classes, and you don't have to worry about that level of detail because it's all documented how you can go about changing the way that things look without having to go do all that research yourself, if that makes sense.
Okay, so we're coming up on the hour. We have time for one or two more if you want to get in some last questions, but we do have more, and I'll throw this out to the panel. The question is, how should I think about the business case of taking a native approach to building applications versus using web technology? How does the business angle work into that?
Yeah, I'll start with that. So I think, if you're building if you want to build a native, I mean, one of the things that you need to think about is, well, what's the cost? How many additional resources? If you're taking a native approach, you may be you're developing potentially for each platform with, different people that are doing that, and then different set of people that are developing for the desktop. I mean, there's still a lot of organizations and lots of application types. You have to support the desktop, tablet, and mobile. You don't have the luxury of just having one platform that you need to support. So in the model that Diane built, we actually have that calculation to help people sort of understand what would the cost difference be, and a lot of it boils down to the time and the cost of resources to do that.
Okay, thank you for that. Okay, as I said, we're really bumping right up against the hour, so I'm going to throw it out to each of you for maybe a 30-second takeaway for our attendees. If there's one thing that one or two higher level ideas that they can take away from the webinar, if you could share them. So I'll throw it out. Somebody can start.
Okay, I'll start. So I think to start, what I'd like to encourage people on the webinar to think about is you really think about what are the requirements for your application, how long is it going to live, what kind of environment is it going to live in, how many different devices that do you have to support, what's your timeline. These are all factors that you need to think about to decide what is the right technology approach for you in building your web application, because that decision is really going to differ depending on what you're going to do in your specific circumstance. So building a robust enterprise application is a lot different from building a short-lived 2 to 3 month small project, and that's how you need to approach the decision making about what's the right choice for you.
Okay, anybody else?
This is Diane. I will echo to some degree what Kristen said, where the value of a framework like Sencha is going to depend very much on your unique environment, and using some of the tools that we've put together with Sencha to help you understand what specifically the value your environment get based on how many years your application will be in production, what controls and other components you need to use is going to be very valuable in helping understand. So this can be a calculation that takes some thought, but it's not that complicated, and it's a worthwhile exercise to go through because the savings can be pretty dramatic.
Very good. John, do you want to add anything from the sidelines?
Sure. So, obviously, what Kristen and Diane said is helpful, and from a technical perspective, I just like to reiterate that a lot of a lot of what's going through your mind when you're making this decision is typically the decisions being made at the beginning of a project, and kind of in the back of your mind, you're thinking about what are the costs really going to be of whatever solution it is that I'm trying to adopt. I mean, that's kind of what underlies the whole decision-making process is in addition to finding a good technological match and that type of thing, you need to make sure that you're choosing something that's not going to be a huge can of worms and create huge expenses, because the last thing you want to do is start down a path and then find out that you're at the bottom of a hole that you need to climb up out of. And so, just being cognizant of the fact that a lot of these costs, some of them are known up front, and you can anticipate that, but a lot of them are going to be downstream, and the longer lived the project is, the longer it needs to be maintained and supported, the more expensive some of these decisions are going to be. So, try to factor that into the decision-making process. Understand that if you have a long-lived project, you really need to think about what's the impact going to be on new developers that are brought in to help sustain the project after a few years. Once the original developers might be gone, you need to have people who can make sure that the project continues to live on, and you're able to support your own users. And so just keep that in mind as you're making the decision. A lot of times, things like open source projects can be short-lived, or they can kind of disappear overnight without much warning, and you need to be able to well, maybe not anticipate that, but adapt to that on the fly, and have a backup plan to make sure that your project doesn't, the success of your project doesn't hinge on conditions that you don't have any control over.
Excellent. That's a great point. I appreciate it. Well, I'd like to take the time to thank Diane Haglund of Dimensional Research, Kristen Brennan, and John Jarboe from Sencha. Of course, we'd like to thank Sencha for sponsoring this program today. And of course, we'd like to thank you, all of our attendees, for hanging in there throughout this session. So on behalf of everybody in BZ Media and SD Times, I'm Dave Rubenstein saying so long until next time. Take care.